They say blood is thicker than water. For 70 years, I believed that. I built an empire with my own two hands, all for my son, my only child. I thought I was giving him the world. But one cold Tuesday morning, I sat in a bank, watching that same son try to strip me of everything I had ever earned, my dignity included. He had doctor's notes, legal papers, a mountain of lies to prove I was a senile old fool. He had it all planned. But he didn't count on one thing. A simple three-word note passed to a bank manager who remembered a promise made 20 years ago. My story isn't about money. It's about a betrayal so deep it could curdle the soul and the terrible, beautiful karma that followed. My name is Arthur Pendleton, and for most of my 81 years, I've believed in the simple calculus of hard work. You put in the sweat, you reap the reward. I started Pendleton Construction with a second-hand pickup truck, a box of tools, and a loan I had no business getting. My wife, my Eleanor, she was the one who believed in me when I didn't even believe in myself. She'd pack my lunch every morning before dawn, a thermos of hot coffee in the winter, iced tea in the summer. On the top of the brown paper bag, she'd always write a little note, "Build something beautiful today, my love." And I did. Over 50 years, that little company grew into a titan of industry. We built bridges that spanned rivers people said were untamable, and skyscrapers that scraped the heavens. We built communities, hospitals, schools, and through it all, there was Eleanor. She was the grace to my grit, the quiet wisdom behind my loud ambition. We had one child, a son, Richard. We called him Rick. From the moment he was born, he was the center of our universe. Eleanor doted on him, and I saw in him the future of everything I had built. I wanted to give him the life I never had, the best schools, the fancy cars, the trips to Europe. I thought I was paving his road to success, but now looking back with the cold clarity of age, I see I was just paving it. He never learned how to mix the concrete himself. Eleanor passed away 12 years ago. Cancer. It came on fast and it was cruel. On her last day in that sterile white room that smelled of antiseptic and fading hope, she held my hand. Her grip was so weak like a little bird. She made me promise two things. First, that I would live a full life, not just sit around waiting to join her. And second, that I would look after Rick. "He has a good heart, Arthur," she whispered, her voice a dry rustle of leaves. "It just gets lost sometimes. Guide him." I promised. I would have promised her the moon. But Rick's heart didn't just get lost. It seemed to vanish entirely. He was in his late 40s by then, married to a woman named Amelia, who had eyes like a hawk spotting a field mouse. She saw my son not as a man, but as an heir. Together they bled money, failed business ventures, a boutique winery, a high-tech startup with no actual tech, an art gallery that only ever sold one painting, to me. Bad investments in stocks a blindfolded monkey could have picked better. And always, I was the safety net, the bank of Dad. I'd give him the money, disguised as a loan we both knew would never be repaid, and I'd give him a lecture. "Rick, you need to be smarter than this. You need to build something for yourself." He'd nod, his expression a perfect blend of shame and sincerity. "You're right, Dad, I know. This is the last time. I promise." It was never the last time. The change, the real, chilling change, began about 2 years ago. The requests for money became more frequent, more desperate. But it was more than that. It was the way he and Amelia started looking at me. Not with the casual entitlement I was used to, but with a kind of clinical assessment. They'd visit my home, a place filled with memories of Eleanor, and Amelia would comment on the value of the paintings. Rick would ask strange, probing questions about my finances, my accountant, my lawyers. Then came the whispers about my health. It started subtly. "Dad, are you feeling all right? You seem a bit forgetful lately." Or Amelia would say, "Arthur, you told us that story last week, don't you remember?" At first I brushed it off. I was getting older after all. Forgetting a name here or there was part of the territory. But their comments were too frequent, too targeted. They weren't born of genuine concern. They were suggestions, seeds being planted. I'd mention I misplaced my car keys and they'd exchange a significant look. I'd pause to find a word, and Rick would jump in with, "It's okay, Dad, take your time," in a patronizing tone that made my skin crawl. They were building a narrative, a story about a doting old man losing his grip. And I, fool that I was, didn't understand the final chapter they were writing until it was almost too late. The day I realized their true intentions was the day I truly understood the depths of human greed. It was the day I stopped seeing the little boy Eleanor had loved and started seeing the monster he had become. It all came to a head in my own study, a room where I'd signed deals worth hundreds of millions, and where I discovered a betrayal that was priceless. The gaslighting was a slow poison. For months, Rick and Amelia dripped it into my life with calculated precision. They bought me one of those digital pill organizers that beeped aggressively, insisting I was forgetting my blood pressure medication, though my doctor had confirmed I was as healthy as a man 20 years younger. They'd helpfully label cabinets in my kitchen, plates, glasses, cutlery, as if I were a tourist in my own home. Amelia was the architect of this insidious theater. She would call me, her voice dripping with syrupy false concern. "Arthur, Rick is just so worried about you. You didn't answer the phone yesterday afternoon. We were about to call the police to do a wellness check." "Amelia," I'd say, my voice tight, "I was at my golf game, the same game I've played every Thursday for 30 years. "Oh, of course," she'd titter. "Silly me. It just slips our minds, with everything else." But the implication was clear. It wasn't her mind that was slipping. The true purpose of their campaign became terrifyingly clear one rainy Wednesday. Rick and Amelia were visiting under the pretense of bringing me groceries, though I had a full pantry. They thought I had gone upstairs for a nap. I have good ears, one of the few things age hasn't managed to steal from me. And as I stood at the top of the stairs, their hushed, urgent voices drifted up from my study. My study, the one room they knew was my sanctuary. "The papers are all ready," Amelia whispered, a sharp, metallic edge to her voice. "Dr. Peterson signed off on the cognitive assessment. He agrees a conservatorship is the most humane option." "Dr. Peterson? My longtime physician?" I felt a cold dread seep into my bones. I hadn't had a cognitive assessment. Rick's voice was lower, more hesitant. "Are you sure about this, Amy? It feels wrong." He's still sharp. "Is he, Rick?" she snapped back. "Or is that what you want to believe? He lost his keys 3 times last month. He forgot our anniversary. He's a liability. Vinny isn't going to wait forever for his money. This is the only way to get liquid. Once we have power of attorney, we can start selling off the assets. The company stock first, then the properties. We can pay off Vinny and finally live the life we deserve." Vinny. The name hit me like a physical blow. Vinny the Vice Costello, a loan shark with a reputation that could curdle milk. My son, my only son, was in debt to a man like that. And to pay him, he was planning to steal my life's work, my very identity, by having me declared mentally incompetent. The promise I made to Eleanor echoed in my mind, a ghostly, painful mockery. Guide him. How could I guide a man who was actively trying to push me off a cliff? I didn't confront them. Not then. An old lion doesn't roar when the jackals are circling. He waits. He watches. He plans. I retreated silently up the stairs, my heart pounding a furious, heavy rhythm against my ribs. Betrayal is a cold, sharp thing. It cuts deeper than any knife. This wasn't just about money. They were trying to erase me, to turn me into a non-person, a ghost in my own life, while they feasted on the empire I had built. The next day, I made an excuse to tidy up my study after they had left. It took me less than 10 minutes to find what I was looking for. Tucked inside a leather-bound copy of The Great Gatsby on my bookshelf, oh, the irony, was a slim manila folder. My hands trembled as I opened it. Inside were the documents they'd been discussing. A forged letter on Dr. Peterson's official letterhead, detailing a litany of fabricated symptoms of advanced dementia. It was expertly done. It listed dates of appointments that never happened and conversations we never had. Alongside it was a thick stack of legal papers drawn up by a lawyer I'd never heard of, petitioning the court for an emergency conservatorship. And there, at the bottom of the stack, was the crown jewel of their treason, a general power of attorney form. It would give Rick complete and total control over every single one of my assets, my bank accounts, my properties, my company. My entire life signed over. And at the bottom of the form, where my signature should have been, was a near-perfect forgery of my name. Arthur Pendleton. It was my name, but it looked like a curse. They hadn't filed it yet. They were waiting for one more piece. They needed access to my main private wealth account at Sterling National Bank to show the court the complexity of the estate and the urgent need for management. They needed to get a statement, and maybe, I suspected, make a large withdrawal to pay off this Vinny. I sat there in my leather chair, the chair where I'd planned my family's future, holding the blueprint for my own destruction. The grief was immense, a physical weight that pressed down on my chest. But underneath the grief, something else was stirring, a cold, hard anger. The same grit that had helped me build an empire from dust was now hardening into a weapon. They thought I was a feeble old man. They thought I was a character in the story they were writing. It was time for Arthur Pendleton to write a chapter of his own. I picked up the phone and made an appointment at Sterling National. An appointment for myself, my son, and his wife. The stage had to be set perfectly for the final act. The next 2 days were the longest of my life. I had to play the part they had cast for me, the aging, slightly confused patriarch. When Rick called to tell me that his financial advisor suggested we all go to the bank to consolidate some accounts for better returns, I played along. The bank? Oh, I don't know, Rick. It's all so confusing these days, I said, injecting a slight quaver into my voice. Don't you worry about a thing, Dad, he said, his voice slick with false assurance. Amelia and I will handle everything. We just need you there to sign a few papers. It's for your own good. To simplify things. To simplify things. He meant to simplify my existence down to a single, forged signature that would liquidate my entire life. We set the appointment for Tuesday at 10 a.m. My plan was risky. It relied not on lawyers or contracts, but on a memory. It relied on character, specifically the character of one Sarah Jenkins. Sarah was the manager of the Sterling National Branch. She was now in her late 40s, a sharp, no-nonsense woman with kind eyes. But I knew her when she was just a teenager. Her father, Frank Jenkins, was my first ever foreman, a good, honest man who worked for me for over 30 years. When Frank passed away, I made sure his family was taken care of. I paid for Sarah's business degree at the State University. When she graduated, I made a call to the then president of Sterling National, a man I played golf with, and recommended her for their management training program. I never told her I made that call. I just told her I was proud of her. Over the years, Sarah and I had maintained a professional friendship. She handled my accounts personally. We chat about the weather, about her kids, about the old days with her dad. She respected me, and I trusted her. My entire plan hinged on that trust. The night before the bank meeting, I sat alone in my study, the silence of the large house humming around me. I pulled out a piece of my personal stationery, the thick, cream-colored paper with my initials embossed at the top. My hand was steady as I picked up my favorite fountain pen, the one Eleanor had given me for our 25th anniversary. I didn't write a long, elaborate letter. In a situation like this, panic can make people miss the details. It had to be simple, a trigger, a phrase that would mean nothing to Rick and Amelia, but everything to Sarah. I thought back to a conversation I'd had with Sarah about a year after her father died. We were in her office and she was telling me how much she missed him. I told her about Eleanor, about how the little things are what keep people alive in your heart. I told her about the notes Eleanor used to leave on my lunch bags. Then I shared a specific memory. The year we finally broke even, I told her, the year I knew Pendleton Construction was going to make it, I came home to find Eleanor had planted a whole row of lilac bushes along the driveway. She said they were for remembrance and new beginnings. Every year after that, when they bloomed, she'd clip a small sprig and put it in a vase on my desk. She'd always say the same thing. Remember the lilacs, Arthur. Remember what they mean. Sarah had teared up at that story. That's beautiful, Arthur, she'd said. A secret code between you two. A secret code. On that piece of stationery, I wrote just 3 words. 3 words that carried the weight of a lifetime of love, struggle, and success. Remember the lilacs. I folded the note carefully and slipped it into the inside pocket of my suit jacket. Then I took out the forged power of attorney document I'd found. I made a high-quality color copy of the signature page. I put the original forgery back in the folder in the book and the copy into a separate envelope. I was building my own arsenal of truth. The next morning, I dressed in my best suit, the charcoal gray one I wore for important board meetings. I looked at myself in the mirror. They saw a frail old man. I needed the world, and more importantly, Sarah Jenkins, to see Arthur Pendleton, the man who built the city. When Rick and Amelia arrived to pick me up, they were beaming, their faces glowing with a predatory triumph. Amelia fussed over my tie, her touch cold and reptilian. Rick put a hand on my shoulder, his grip a little too firm, a gesture meant to guide, to control. "Ready to go, Dad? It'll all be over soon," Rick said with a smile. "Yes, son," I said, my voice calm and even. "It certainly will." As we drove to the bank, they kept up a cheerful, inane chatter, pointing out things on the street as if I were a child. They were so confident, so sure of their victory. They had no idea they weren't escorting a lamb to the slaughter. They were walking into a trap I had spent a lifetime building, a trap built on loyalty, memory, and 3 simple words. The bank was just as I remembered it, cold, quiet, and smelling faintly of money and floor polish. The marble floors gleamed under the recessed lighting, and the only sound was the soft hum of computers and the distant, rhythmic thump-thump of a teller's stamp. It felt like a cathedral dedicated to commerce. Today, it would be my courtroom. Sarah Jenkins met us at the entrance to the private wealth management section. She was the picture of professionalism in a smart navy blue suit, her hair pulled back in a neat chignon. "Arthur, it's so good to see you," she said, her smile warm and genuine as she shook my hand. Her handshake was firm, confident. "You too, Sarah. You know my son, Rick, and his wife, Amelia," I said, gesturing to them. Sarah's smile became a little more businesslike as she greeted them. She had met Rick a few times over the years, and I always got the sense that she wasn't impressed. She could spot a man who had never done a hard day's work in his life from a mile away. "Of course. Please come back to my office," she said, leading us down a carpeted hallway to a spacious room with a large mahogany desk and a window overlooking the city, a city I helped build. We all sat down, me on one side of the desk with Sarah, Rick and Amelia on the other. They looked like a pair of vultures perched and ready to feast. Rick cleared his throat and took the lead, pulling a sleek leather briefcase onto his lap. "Sarah, thank you for seeing us. As I mentioned on the phone, we're here today to help Dad streamline his finances. He's been finding it a bit overwhelming lately. We want to consolidate his primary accounts and, for ease of management, we've prepared a power of attorney that will allow me to handle the day-to-day transactions on his behalf." He spoke with such smooth, rehearsed sincerity. He was an actor in the grand play of his own greed. Amelia nodded along, her face a mask of loving concern. Sarah looked at me. "Is that right, Arthur? You're looking to have Rick manage your accounts?" This was the moment. My heart was beating a slow, heavy drum against my ribs. I had to continue playing my part. I looked down at my hands, feigning a bit of confusion. "Well, yes, Rick and Amelia think it's for the best. So many papers. It gets complicated." "I understand," Sarah said, her voice gentle, but her eyes, her sharp, intelligent eyes, were fixed on my face, searching. Rick clicked his briefcase open and slid the thick stack of documents across the desk. The power of attorney was on top. "We have everything in order. It's all signed and notarized. We just need to have the bank formally recognize it and get a full statement of the consolidated accounts." Sarah picked up the document. She examined the first page, her expression unreadable. She flipped through the pages, her professionalism a perfect shield. She paused on the final page, the one with the forged signature. She looked at it for a long moment, then she looked at me again. I met her gaze, and for a fraction of a second, I let the mask slip. I let her see the desperation, the plea, the truth. Then I reached into my jacket pocket. My hand was shaking, but not from age. It was from the adrenaline, the monumental weight of the moment. "Actually, Sarah," I said, my voice quiet but clear, Before we go any further, I have something for you. I pulled out the folded piece of my personal stationery and slid it across the mahogany desk. Rick and Amelia tensed. "Dad, what's that?" Rick asked, his voice suddenly sharp. "All the necessary papers are right there." "Just a little note, son. For Sarah," I said, keeping my eyes locked on her. Sarah picked up the note. Her long, manicured fingers unfolded the thick paper. Rick and Amelia leaned forward, their curiosity and suspicion warring on their faces. They couldn't have imagined what was written on it. Sarah's eyes scanned the 3 words. "Remember the lilacs." For a moment, nothing happened. Her professional mask remained perfectly in place. Then I saw it, a flicker in her eyes, a subtle, almost imperceptible intake of breath. The memory registered, the story I'd told her about Eleanor, about new beginnings, about a secret code. She looked from the note in her hand to the forged signature on the legal document, and then back to my face. And in that moment, she understood everything. The gaslighting, the manipulation, the attempted theft, the utter soul-crushing betrayal. Her whole demeanor shifted. The warmth in her eyes cooled into ice. The professional gentleness hardened into steel. She placed my note face down on her desk, a quiet act of alliance. She looked at Rick. "Mr. Pendleton," she said, her voice now devoid of any pleasantry, "this power of attorney document is very comprehensive. Before we can act on it, I need to perform our standard security protocol for such a significant transfer of authority." "Of course," Rick said, leaning back in his chair, smug and confident again. He thought it was just a formality. Sarah picked up her desk phone, but she didn't call a clerk or another banker. She pressed a single speed dial button. "Security, this is Sarah Jenkins in Wealth Management. I have a Code 7 situation in my office. Please attend immediately. And Officer Miller, please notify the City Police Department. We have a case of suspected elder financial abuse and forgery in progress." The color drained from Rick's face. Amelia's jaw went slack, her mask of concern shattering to reveal raw, ugly panic. "What?" Rick stammered, half rising from his chair. "What is this? What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about this signature, Mr. Pendleton," Sarah said, her voice ringing with authority as she tapped the forged document. "It's a very good imitation of your father's signature. Very good, but it's not perfect. And more importantly, your father just informed me in no uncertain terms that this entire transaction is being conducted under duress and is fraudulent." "That's absurd," Amelia shrieked, finding her voice. "He's confused. We told you he's been having episodes. He doesn't know what he's saying." Before I could even respond, 2 uniformed bank security guards appeared at the office door, big men who looked like they were carved from granite. I finally allowed myself to speak my truth, my voice no longer quavering or weak, but filled with the cold, hard fury I had been suppressing. "I am not confused, Amelia. I have never been more clear in my entire life. I know exactly what you and my son have been trying to do, and it's over." I reached into my other pocket and pulled out the envelope containing the copy of the forged signature page. I placed it on the desk next to Sarah's phone. "And Sarah," I said, "I believe the police will be interested in seeing the original document, which is currently located in a copy of The Great Gatsby in my home library." Rick looked at me, his eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and pure, unadulterated hatred. The little boy was gone. The monster was fully revealed. He saw not his father, but the man who had outsmarted him. The distant wail of sirens grew closer. The game was up. My son had tried to steal my fortune and my future. But he had been defeated by a memory, a promise, and a fistful of lilacs. The arrival of the police was swift and brutally efficient. 2 officers, a man and a woman, entered Sarah's office with a calm professionalism that seemed to suck all the air out of the room. The bank guards stood stoically at the door, blocking any chance of escape. Rick and Amelia were a pathetic sight. Their meticulously constructed facade had crumbled into dust, revealing the desperate, grasping people beneath. Amelia began to weep, not tears of remorse, but of pure, frustrated rage. Rick just stared at me, his face a contorted mask of fury and disbelief. He couldn't process it. In his mind, I was the doddering old fool, the obstacle to be managed. He was the smart one. How could this have happened? "Dad, tell them. Tell them it's a misunderstanding," he pleaded, his voice cracking. The bravado was gone, replaced by the whine of a child caught with his hand in the cookie jar. I looked at my son, the flesh of my flesh, the boy I had taught to ride a bike and bait a fishing hook, and I felt nothing. The love, the decades of paternal affection, had been cauterized by the sheer heat of his betrayal. The wound was too deep, the poison too potent. "There is no misunderstanding, Richard," I said, and for the first time in over 50 years, I used his full name. The sound of it hung in the air between us, formal and final. "You tried to have me declared incompetent. You forged my signature. You conspired to steal everything my mother and I built. The only misunderstanding was mine, forever believing you had a shred of decency left in you." Sarah Jenkins calmly explained the situation to the officers, presenting the fraudulent power of attorney document and my secret note, which she handled as if it were a sacred text. She explained the Code 7 was a silent alarm for just this type of situation, an emergency protocol to protect vulnerable clients. She was magnificent, cool, collected, and absolutely in charge. Frank Jenkins would have been so proud of his daughter. The police separated us. I gave my statement in Sarah's office. The door closed. I handed over the copy of the forgery and told them exactly where to find the original, along with the fabricated doctor's letter. Through the thick glass, I could see Rick and Amelia being questioned in the hallway. Their story fell apart under the most basic scrutiny. They had no answers for why they had forged a doctor's assessment or why they were in such a desperate hurry to liquidate assets. The climax of the scene was both surreal and deeply, horribly final. The officer led Rick away in handcuffs. As they passed Sarah's office door, he looked at me through the glass one last time. His eyes weren't pleading anymore. They were cold, empty, and filled with a chilling hatred. In that moment, I wasn't his father. I was just the man who had ruined him. The weeks that followed were a blur of legal proceedings. My testimony, combined with the mountain of evidence, was damning. Dr. Peterson, my actual doctor, was horrified when he learned his name, and letterhead had been used in such a vile manner. He provided a sworn affidavit confirming my excellent health and mental acuity, which served as the final nail in their legal coffin. The full story of Rick's desperation came out. His gambling debts to Vinnie Costello were in the high six figures. He and Amelia had been living a lie for years, propped up by my handouts and a mountain of credit. The boutique winery hadn't just failed, it had been a front for laundering money from one of Rick's even more disastrous schemes. They weren't just careless, they were criminals. They took a plea deal to avoid a longer sentence. Rick was charged with forgery and attempted grand larceny. Amelia was charged as an accomplice. Due to their being first-time offenders, they avoided a long prison term, but their lives were effectively over. They were sentenced to 5 years of probation, a hefty fine they had no way of paying, and court-ordered restitution to me, a symbolic gesture, as they were bankrupt. But for me, the legal victory was hollow. The real damage wasn't financial. It was the shattering of my family, the obliteration of the past. Every happy memory I had of Rick as a child was now tainted, viewed through the lens of the man he had become. The photo on my mantelpiece of a smiling boy on his first bicycle felt like a picture of a stranger. My lawyer, a sharp man named David Chen, advised me on the final necessary step. "Arthur, you need to protect yourself. You need to protect your legacy." So I did the hardest thing I've ever had to do in my life. Harder than starting my business from nothing. Harder than burying my wife. I sat with David and drew up a new will. In it, I formally and irrevocably disinherited my son, Richard Pendleton. I made it ironclad, with clauses and provisions to ensure he could never again try to lay claim to a single penny of the Pendleton estate. I severed him from my life, from my legacy, from my bloodline. It was a legal amputation of a diseased limb. I signed the papers with the same fountain pen Eleanor had given me, the same pen I'd used to write the note to Sarah. One note to save my life, another to end my son's part in it. The ink felt as black and final as a tombstone. The promise I made to Eleanor to guide him had failed. But another promise, the one I had made to myself to build something beautiful and lasting, was one I could still keep. But it would be on my terms and my terms alone. Karma, I've found, isn't a lightning bolt from a clear blue sky. It's a slow, creeping rot. It's the natural consequence of a rotten foundation. For Rick and Amelia, The foundation of their entire life was built on my money and their own lies. Once I removed my support, the whole structure didn't just fall, it imploded. Their conviction, even without jail time, made them pariahs. Their high society friends, the ones they had tried so desperately to impress with their lavish parties and designer clothes, vanished overnight. The story of what they had tried to do to me spread like wildfire through the city's elite circles. They weren't just broke. They were a scandal, a cautionary tale whispered over cocktails at the country club. Their house, a monstrously large mansion they couldn't afford, was the first thing to go. The bank foreclosed on it. I heard from my lawyer that they had to sell everything: Amelia's jewelry, the expensive art, the real pieces, not the fakes she usually bought, the luxury cars, just to pay their immediate legal fees. They went from a 10,000 square foot palace to a cramped, dingy apartment in a part of town they used to mock. But their most pressing problem wasn't social shame or downsizing. It was Vinny, the vice Costello. Loan sharks don't care about plea bargains or probation. They operate on their own brutal timetable. Without access to my fortune, Rick had no way to pay back the enormous sum he owed. About 3 months after the incident at the bank, I received a phone call from a blocked number. I almost didn't answer, but something compelled me to. The voice on the other end was rough, like gravel being churned in a cement mixer. "Art Pendleton? Who is this?" I asked. "The name's Vinny. Your kid, Ricky, he owes me a significant amount of cash. Seeing as he's fresh out, I figure you, being the responsible father, might want to settle his account." The sheer audacity of it almost made me laugh. "My son's debts are his own," I said, my voice as cold as steel. "You made a bad investment, Vinny. I suggest you write it off." There was a low chuckle on the other end. "It don't work like that, Art. We don't write things off. We collect, one way or another. Maybe I should pay Ricky a visit, remind him about the interest rate. It's a killer." He hung up. I won't lie and say the threat didn't unnerve me, but my resolve didn't waver. This was the world Rick had chosen to live in. These were the people he had chosen to associate with. He would face the consequences. The consequences, as it turned out, were severe. I didn't get the details directly, but news trickles down. An old acquaintance who works in the ER at the city hospital mentioned a John Doe who had come in one night, beaten so badly he had a broken jaw, 3 fractured ribs, and a permanent limp. He matched Rick's description. There was no police report filed. It was a message. A down payment on a debt, paid in flesh and bone. The final pathetic act of their downfall came about a year after their sentencing. I received a letter. The envelope was cheap and the address was scrawled in Amelia's looping, dramatic handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of ruled paper, torn from a spiral notebook. The letter was from Rick. It was a rambling, self-pitying mess. It was full of excuses and blame. It was the bank's fault. It was Amelia's fault for pushing him. It was Vinny's fault for lending him the money. It was my fault for not understanding the pressure he was under. He talked about his injuries, his miserable apartment, his dead-end job washing dishes at a greasy spoon diner, the first real job he'd had in his life. At the very end, after pages of whining, came the real point of the letter. "Dad, I know I made a mistake. I've learned my lesson. But I'm still your son. I'm desperate. We have nothing. Please, I'm begging you. Just a little to get back on our feet. For Mom's sake." She wouldn't have wanted to see me like this. Using Eleanor's memory, his sainted mother's memory, as a tool for manipulation, that was the moment any last lingering ember of pity I might have felt for him was extinguished. He had learned nothing. His heart hadn't just gotten lost. It was a barren, empty cavern. I took the letter in my fountain pen, the pen that had now become a symbol of my liberation. On the back of his pathetic plea, I wrote just 2 words: "Account closed." I mailed it back to him. I never heard from him or Amelia again. Their echo in my life faded, leaving behind only a scar and a profound, clarifying silence. The karma wasn't just that they had lost the money. It was that they had lost themselves in the pursuit of it, and in the end, they were left with nothing but the empty shells of their own greed. In the quiet that followed the storm of my son's betrayal, I was left with a sprawling empire and no heir. The legal battles were over, the dust had settled, and the silence in my large house was deafening. At first, this silence felt like a victory, like the calm after a long and terrible fever. I had won. I had protected what was mine. But as the days turned into weeks, the silence began to change its character. It was no longer peaceful, it was hollow. It was the sound of a vast and cavernous emptiness. I would walk the halls of the home Eleanor and I had built, my footsteps echoing on the polished hardwood floors. I'd run my hand along the mahogany dining table where we once hosted boisterous family dinners, now a gleaming, sterile surface that hadn't seen a guest in months. The grandfather clock in the foyer, a gift from my first board of directors, ticked away the seconds of my life with a heavy, monotonous rhythm. Tick, tock. Each one a reminder of time spent and time still left to spend, alone. I had saved my fortune. But for what? To be the wealthiest man in the cemetery? The bitterness was a tempting poison. It would have been so easy to let it consume me, to curdle into a resentful old man, rattling around in his mansion, trusting no one, hating the world that had taken his family from him. I tried to resume my old life. I went to my weekly golf game, but the jokes of my friends felt distant, their concerns about market fluctuations trivial. I sat in on a board meeting at Pendleton Construction, a company I still held a symbolic stake in, and found myself staring out the window, unable to connect with the talk of quarterly earnings and expansion plans. The fire that had driven me for 60 years had been reduced to cold, gray ash. One rainy afternoon, unable to bear the oppressive silence any longer, I went up to the attic. I was looking for something, though I wasn't sure what. A distraction, perhaps. I opened an old trunk, releasing the scent of cedar and mothballs, and began sifting through stacks of old photo albums. There were pictures of my first pickup truck, a proud, smiling younger version of myself leaning against the dented fender. Pictures of company picnics, of building sites, of ribbon-cutting ceremonies. And everywhere, there was Eleanor. I found the photo I was subconsciously searching for. It was from the early 90s, taken on the day we opened the first public library we had funded, the Eleanor Pendleton Reading Room, in a part of town that needed it badly. In the picture, she wasn't looking at the camera. She was looking at a small girl who was holding up a copy of Charlotte's Web with wide, wondrous eyes. Eleanor's face was illuminated by a joy so pure and so profound it seemed to radiate right off the glossy paper. The joy on her face had nothing to do with the size of the donation or the plaque on the wall bearing our name. It was the joy of connection, of giving something that would grow in the mind of a child. I remembered what she said to me that night as we sat on our porch. I had been talking about profits, about how the project was a net loss but good for public relations. She had taken my hand and said, "Arthur, money is just bricks and mortar. It's a tool like one of your hammers. You can use it to build a wall, or you can use it to build a bridge. A legacy isn't the wall you build around yourself. It's the bridges you build for others." Her words, echoing across the chasm of a dozen years, struck me with the force of a physical blow. I had been so obsessed with my wall, with protecting my kingdom, that I had forgotten its purpose. My son's betrayal had blinded me. He saw my life's work as a pile of assets to be liquidated. And in my fight against him, I had started to see it the same way. A thing to be guarded, not a thing to be used. Eleanor knew better. In that dusty attic, surrounded by the ghosts of my past, I finally knew what I had to do. The bitterness receded, replaced by a surge of purpose so powerful it felt like a resurrection. I wasn't at the end of my story. I was at the beginning of my most important project. The next morning, I called my lawyer, David Chen. "David," I said, my voice clear and firm, "I want to give it all away." There was a stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Arthur, all of it? Are you feeling all right?" "I've never felt better," I said, and I meant it. "I don't want to leave an inheritance, David. I want to build a legacy, and I want to do it now, while I'm still here to oversee the construction." We spent the next 6 months in a whirlwind of activity that made me feel decades younger. I sold my majority shares in Pendleton Construction, a move that sent shockwaves through the financial community. The entire proceeds, my personal fortune down to the last dollar, were placed into a trust. I met with philanthropists, with community organizers, with legal experts. This wasn't a simple act of charity. It was the founding of an institution, and I poured all the business acumen I'd spent a lifetime acquiring into its design. It was the last great thing I would ever build. We named it the Eleanor Pendleton Foundation. Its mission was a reflection of everything Eleanor and I valued. First, it would provide full scholarships for underprivileged students pursuing degrees in engineering, architecture, and urban planning. The builders of tomorrow would not be held back by the circumstances of their birth. Second, it would fund and build libraries and literacy programs in underserved communities. Every child deserved to feel the magic Eleanor saw in that little girl's eyes. And the third pillar, the one I designed myself, was the Guardian Fund. It would be dedicated to providing free legal aid and support services for the victims of elder financial abuse. It would create a network of advocates, of Sarah Jenkinses, to stand in the gap for the vulnerable. It would run public awareness campaigns to teach people the warning signs I had so foolishly missed. My private pain would be forged into a public shield for others. The day we announced the foundation to the world was a bright, clear autumn morning. We held the press conference in the ballroom of a hotel I had built 30 years prior. As I stood at the podium, looking out at the flashing cameras and the sea of expectant faces, I felt no nerves. Sarah Jenkins was in the front row, her expression one of luminous pride. I told them my story, not the sordid details of my family's collapse, but the story of my awakening. I spoke of Eleanor, of her grace, her wisdom, and her belief that our true worth is measured in the bridges we build. A legacy isn't what you leave for people, I said, my voice carrying across the silent room. It's what you leave inside people. The opportunity, the knowledge, the safety, the hope. Today, this foundation is not an end, but a beginning. It is the continuation of a promise I made to my wife a long time ago, to build something beautiful. After the applause faded and the reporters swarmed my new board of directors, Sarah made her way to the stage. "She would be so incredibly proud of you, Arthur," she said, her eyes glistening. "She would be proud of us both," I replied. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a small, velvet-lined box. "I have something for you." I opened it to reveal the fountain pen, the one Eleanor had given me, the one I had used to save myself and later to disinherit my son. It had been professionally cleaned and polished, its gold nib gleaming. But along the side of the cap, I had a jeweler add a delicate, almost hidden engraving. It was a tiny sprig of lilac flowers. "I can't possibly accept this, Arthur," she whispered, her hand flying to her mouth. "It means too much." "You're not accepting it as a gift," I explained gently. "You are accepting it as its official custodian. I've spoken to the board. This pen will be the first item in the Foundation's historical archives. It is a permanent reminder that our greatest asset isn't in a bank vault. It's in the courage and character of good people. It's a reminder that a few simple words, born of loyalty and love, can change the world." Tears now openly streaming down her face, she took the box. "I'll protect it with my life," she vowed. "My life is different now. I still live in my house, but it is no longer silent. Twice a week, I mentor a young, brilliant engineering student, a girl from the rough side of town who is the first in her family to attend university. The house is filled with the sounds of her ambitious ideas and her infectious laughter. My dining table is now used for the Foundation's board meetings, surrounded by the sharpest, most compassionate minds I could find. Last week, I attended the groundbreaking for the newest Eleanor Pendleton reading room. As I watched the children in their hard hats, their faces alight with excitement, I didn't see a construction project. I saw a garden, a place where thousands of seeds would be planted for 100 years to come. My son, in his greed, tried to steal my fortune. He thought my legacy was something that could be taken, but all he did was force me to finally understand what it truly was. It wasn't a name carved on a building. It was the future I could build for others. The Pendleton name may end with me, but the work of Eleanor and Arthur Pendleton, the real work, will now go on forever. And that is a victory sweeter than any revenge. It is the victory of a life well built, and a life at last truly understood. So that's my story. It's a story of how the deepest betrayals can sometimes lead to the most profound purpose. My son tried to take my past and my future, but in the end, all he did was liberate me from a legacy of blood and allow me to build a legacy of choice. It's a warning, I suppose, that the monsters we should fear most are sometimes the ones who share our name. But it's also a story of hope. It shows that good people like Sarah Jenkins still exist, and that loyalty and memory can be stronger than any lock and more powerful than any lie. It proves that it's never too late to redefine your life's work, to build something new and beautiful from the wreckage of the old. If my story resonated with you, if it touched you or served as a warning, please consider giving this video a like to help it reach others who might need to hear it. Share it with someone you think might benefit from this message. And if you'd like to hear more stories about life, legacy, and the lessons learned along the way, please subscribe to the channel. Thank you for listening. Be good to each other, and always, always remember the lilacs.